Hi, welcome to episode 86 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Scott Leonard, who lives about 100 miles northeast of me in north central Connecticut. Scott's retired from the Connecticut State Police and is currently a personal trainer. And we were connected by a mutual friend, Pat Kane, who is also a guest of the podcast in episode 84. So, Pat, thank you for joining us today. And Scott, thank you for joining me. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Good. Thank you very much. First, thanks to Pat for introducing us, and thanks for letting me come on and just chat away.
Yeah.
Um, my story is, as you said, I retired from the state police about 3 years ago in Connecticut. I started way back in 2001. We were actually in the academy when 9/11 happened, so
Wow.
got that whole process. We've come full circle, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, and plus, doing the personal training, I'm also do consult work for Department of Transportation, and we teach traffic classes and highway management stuff.
Okay.
So just a continuation of what I did, but at a different level.
Hmm.
Um, Other than that, I grew up in New York.
Oh, you
So
did? Where?
I grew up in Canton, New York, which is north of the Adirondacks. Most people have no idea where it is. Um, I generally tell people, I'm like, you know where Syracuse is? Go 3 hours north, and you run into Canton.
Okay.
And
Wow.
people are
Okay.
like, "That's Canada. It's right
You
next
just
to
put yourself
Canada."
in Lake Erie.
Yeah. Lake Erie is actually like southwest of us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, so you have Watertown, and then you go another hour north, and it's up there. New York kind of goes in that peak, and we're up there. Like the
Okay.
closest city was Ottawa.
Wow.
So yeah, we were way up. But there's no work up there because
Mm.
there's nothing going on. So in order to find work, I had to travel. So
Okay.
I ended up New Jersey to Connecticut, and I said that was kind of the journey. So
What were you doing in New Jersey?
I went to college for like teaching,
Uh-huh.
and because of the area where I grew up, it was very sparse. I was substitute teaching for like $25 a day.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I mean, granted, it was back like 20 some years ago, almost 30 years ago, but
That's
still $25 a day. I'm not paying my student loans,
no.
so
You're not buying
it took a
groceries.
couple. You're right. Luckily, my parents let me live with them for, but at the same time, I want to go out on my own. Um, so I moved down to Jersey with my cousins. They lived down there. I rented out an apartment down there, the basement, just a nasty, just a little basement apartment. I started working for a YMCA and teaching in a couple like Catholic schools, and doing that, I ended up getting into the insurance company because couldn't find like a full time gig teaching. And the members from the YMCA I worked at, one of the guys is like, "Hey, you ever think about doing like adjustment work for insurance?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't know what it is, but I just need to make money." I'm like, "I'm making nothing." Um, Doing that, I got into the investigative work for the insurance company, as I took those steps, which led me into what I always wanted to do was law enforcement.
Hmm.
And I ended up doing the teaching route because I listened to my guidance counselor, and he didn't think I had the demeanor for law enforcement.
What
He was
kind of
like,
demeanor was he thinking you should
I
have?
think it was the old school thought of you have to be brash and like less like rough, and that was never my style.
Right.
It was more let's have a conversation, work things out. Where I think back then maybe it was people looked at it, it was more hit first, ask questions later.
Hmm.
Back in that was you talking late '80s. So, but ironically, going through college and learning the education piece and taking those classes like child psychology and abnormal psych, that really worked well for me when I went into law enforcement because I had a different background than a lot of people.
Hmm.
So,
Now, do you have to have like a full year bachelor's degree to become a state trooper, and then just maybe more general like a police officer? Do you know?
no, some departments require a 2 year or four degree, but the state police of Connecticut, they require a high school
Uh-huh.
only. You have to be 21. Uh,
Hmm.
but the guys that have college generally do much better in the
Hmm.
academy. and better on the testing process, just because you have more experience.
Mm,
You don't have the life experience that some people may have, but you have that educational piece where you become a better test taker, so to speak, and you can pull from different things.
right. So, so you were in the academy when 9/11 happened. How did that impact your feelings about your career, one way or the other?
It really only made it more solid for me because again, I always wanted to do it. I always want to be a a cop. I wanted to help people. It was the cliche. I want to help people.
Hmm.
Um, I really did. Like I enjoyed that. Growing up in a small town, everybody knows everybody. You're raised right, and you help your neighbor. You just kind of what you did, and that just seemed like a natural progression for me.
Hmm.
And then getting into the academy, and then having that happen because back then you didn't have cell phones. Like a couple of people had them, but for the most part, you weren't allowed to bring them into the academy anyway. We had two payphones where we had 114 guys in our class,
Wow.
and there was two payphones, and you had time at night between 9 and 11. That was your free time, which really wasn't free, but if you're on the phone, for the most part, they'd leave you alone. But you still had 114 guys to get through.
Mm,
So for guys that didn't have kids, a lot of times we give up our time for somebody else that had kids so they could stay on a little longer. So I talked to my fiance at the time, um, 10 minutes every Wednesday
hmm.
and go home on Friday. So being in that environment and then watching that stuff happen because you didn't have any TV, you didn't have any radio, and they always told you if something important in the world happens, we'll let you know. Well, they came in. I still remember it in the morning. We were doing like ground fighting and physical confrontation. And they came in, stopped the class, and they said, "Hey, we always said we'd let you know something happened. The plane just hit the World Trade Center. Um, that's all we know right now. Go back to work." So we went back
Wow.
to doing our thing. And then when the second one hit, they actually brought us into a room with a TV so we could watch.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's yeah. I mean, did how long was your training?
So our training back then was ended up being 30 weeks.
So
And you go Monday through Friday. You show up Monday morning at 5:30, depending on the day, and then Friday they let you go home whenever you've accomplished the task for the week. Sometimes that's midnight, sometimes that's 3 in the afternoon.
mhm.
I don't remember ever getting out before like 3, and like 3 was like a gift. It's like, hey, we get out at 3 because I was living in New Jersey at the time, so I'm traveling 3 hours back to Jersey after we get done,
Wow. Mm,
and then when I had to start on Monday mornings, I'm leaving New Jersey at 2 in the morning to get up there in time. So I'm already sleep deprived when I get there. Uh,
Now,
so
is the training you're going through, is that like, is it have the feel of like an army boot camp, or is it more kind of class driven?
no, so it's kind of evolved over the time because I actually worked at the academy for a little bit too. So I've seen it evolve a little bit. But for the most part, it's the core is pretty much the same. We've had a lot of guys in the military go through it, and they said it was harder because it's longer. And they said you went home on the weekends, which made it tougher because then you had to come back. Where the basic training, they're there for 8 weeks and you're done. It's just you're immersed in it with everybody else. Where this, you go Monday morning, you do your thing, then you go home, and then you have Sunday night to think about what's coming up on Monday. Like Sunday nights were awful because you knew you're going back. And the training itself, from being an instructor, and then I also ran the academy throughout my career, you learn that as a recruit, it seems like mass chaos. But then as you become an instructor, you actually learn from the senior instructors. I'm like, this is actually very scripted and very, we have time hacks. And you don't realize it as a recruit, but there's certain things, there's certain notices where somebody's watching a clock. It's like, hey, we only have this much time to do this. So at this time hack, we're done. And if we blow a whistle or we say something, the instructors stop on a dime. It's that discipline of like, hey, we're moving on to the next evolution because we don't have time to do this. So it was very structured. Obviously very stressful in the beginning. We call it artificial stress. because for some people coming in, they could be 21 years old, they could be 40 years old, and they've never really dealt or functioned in a stressful environment. And the first time they do that can't be when they got a gun and a badge and they're out in the middle of the public. So we got to, you get used to that functioning under stress. And then as that progresses, there's really four phases of it. You have that phase, and then the academics hit, and you still have all the other stress, but you've learned to adapt to it. I'll never say it gets easier. You get better at it. When you look back, it's like, okay, I have all the same time hacks to make my bed. I've just gotten efficient at it, and I've learned how to do it so I can actually make my bed, shave, get dressed in 15 minutes. And I'm good. I only need 15 minutes to do that. Where when you first get there, you're not used to working like that. You look half hour, take a shower, have breakfast. Yeah, that's not how it works. So then you get hit with the academics. There's a lot more academics than people think, which is why the people with college background do better, I think, because especially if you've like, I was out of college for 5 years. I went in when I was 29. So I had to relearn how to study a little bit, but I wasn't that far out of it that I'd forgotten everything. Where the guys that haven't gone to college, I think sometimes you get bombarded with so much search and seizure, motor vehicle law, accident investigation, all this stuff that's, some of it's some pretty intense stuff. And you're getting dumped on, and you can only fail two classes, two tests. If you fail two tests, you're done.
Wow.
Very strict when it comes to that stuff, and you learn to work as a team, which this is all what it's designed to do. Work under stress, work with a team, be self sufficient, but understand you never survive in this by yourself. Uh, and then once you get to a level of functioning as a unit, you start getting more freedom back and you become a true working unit. And eventually they turn you over to a field training program. And, after those 60 days, like you're on your own. Because we don't ride with anybody in Connecticut. We ride by ourselves.
Oh wow.
So you'll have people in your area, but they could be a half hour away.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the process for that and that's a very abbreviated version, but kind of gives you the gist of it's really done for a reason. Where some people are like, oh, you're just yelling at them for a reason. Like I look at it now as like I'm really glad I went to the other side and was an instructor because it made me really understand what they were teaching us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Navy, I think, is I guess is analogous. I think in terms of just kind of like the stakes that are like high, and I mean, thankfully, most people don't have to deal with like kind of life or death kind of situations.
Yep.
But I see the same thing. What's the difference between like the Connecticut State Trooper and then like like I guess like New Haven has police and there's like local police
Yep.
forces. So what are like what is the I'm trying to think of the word for it, the jurisdictions, and then what's your responsibilities versus being one of those more local police officers?
So we go to different academies, but we all fall under what's called the post standard. It's the Police Officer Standard Training Council. So everybody falls under that, but we have different academies, and there's satellite academies throughout Connecticut. So the only people that go to the State Police Academy are the troopers. Um, and part of that is because of it's just the nature of how many people we're putting in. And then you have your local academies or your satellite academies. A lot of times they're teaching very similar stuff. They may do it in a different way because not everybody enjoys or wants that high stress in the beginning. My personal opinion is you have some departments that don't have a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to train somebody. You don't want to wash somebody out in the first week because they didn't physically prepare, um, and therefore, like they're not going to be able to complete it. We usually lose at the state police. Our attrition rate is anywhere from a third to 50%, um, and mostly it's because people didn't prepare. And there's really no secrets to it. We show them what's coming. We even bring them in if people are within process and they get to a certain point. We have workouts on Saturdays where those people can come and work out with instructors. because the instructors do all the same workouts. So there's no secrets. It's like, hey, if you can't do this, then you need to rethink about coming here. And part of that is because we are on our own a lot of times. I said the first time I got in a fight with somebody, I was in the woods by myself, and my backup was 25 minutes away, coming 90 miles an hour. So you have to be able to be self-sufficient, and you actually have to be able to talk to people. Like I can't go into a bar fight with 7 people by myself and expect to throw down with everybody because I'm going to lose. I don't care how good you are. 7-on-1, I'm going to lose. So it's a different way of policing. Like you have to talk to people,
Hmm.
which is, the dynamic where the local academies, they don't always want that high stress because a small department may not be able to afford having somebody go in, they lose that investment, and then they put somebody in, they lose that investment. The problem that I saw is where we lost the state police, we lost most of our attrition in the very, probably the first 3 months. The local guys end up losing it when they get out onto the field training because then they start seeing the stress that's out there. They start dealing with all the other stuff that we've dealt with already. Um, and then though they wash those people out then. Doesn't always happen, but that seems to be the thing. As far as jurisdiction goes, each town has their own jurisdiction. In Connecticut, if there is a town that doesn't have their own police force, we then become the jurisdiction. We generally don't encroach on other people's jurisdiction unless the state's attorneys have asked us to. Like if there's some type of incident, say New Haven, and the state's attorney want us to investigate it, we come and investigate it. But we generally don't do that because it just creates bad blood. And for the same reason, they don't generally come into the towns that we're doing it. Or if they are, like, hey, they're going to do a search warrant or something, they'll give us a courtesy call, just like we would give New Haven, like, hey, we're going to serve a search warrant. This is where we're going to go. If you want to bring somebody, if you want to send somebody, great. If not, we're okay. We just want to let you know that we're coming into your town to serve something. Uh, that's and for the most part, most of the towns in the state police they work pretty well together.
Hmm. The So you had mentioned the first fight you were in. Like, what can I ask? What happened with that?
Yeah. So I'm probably 8 months off AFTO, so I'm in my first year. Uh, it's a high school party, at a house. I drove by the house. I knew the people that lived there somewhat because I lived in that town. So I drove by, and it's your typical high school party back in the day. There's 20 cars out there, and the
Hmm.
neighbors have called. It's loud music. So I call into the troop and I tell them, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm like, I know the people that live there somewhat. I'm just going to go in and talk to the kid, tell them to turn the music down. So you go, and it's not the safest thing to do. Like anybody that's watching this is thinking, like, why are you going in there by yourself, dummy? But it's a calculated risk, not necessarily a good one. Uh, and again, I'm 8 months, maybe not thinking it all out. Should I have waited the 15, 20 minutes till somebody else got there? Probably. But again, I go in, I recognize the kid, and at that point they're like, you can't come in here. I'm like, well, I know that kid's underage, and I see the booze, so actually I can come in here now. So because there's a crime being committed, and you start working that through. And again, this is, you're talking 20 some years ago. Talk to the kid. I'm like, look, dude. I'm like, mom and dad. Where's mom and dad? Oh, I don't have their number. Bullshit. I'm like, no parent leaves their kid without a phone number. I'm like, so let's give them a call. He's like, I don't have their phone number. I'm like, all right, well, everybody's got to leave. I'm like, anybody that's drinking isn't driving. The neighbors are called. And then what I used to do when I did that, I would tell the kids, just tell your parents that I'm coming back on Friday at the same time I'm here now. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm coming back next Friday at 3 in the morning to wake your parents up because you woke up your neighbors. And a lot of kids wouldn't tell them, and then I'd knock on the door and they'd be like, "Can I help you?" I'm like, "I guess John didn't tell you what I was coming here for." So you have that little bit of accountability for the kids. But so while I'm talking to this kid, it's a good conversation with all the kids there, like because again, talk to people. I hear a commotion going on outside. So as I go outside, there's a wraparound porch, and as I turn the corner, it's like a movie out of a movie scene. Everybody stops. They turn and look at me, and there's this kid tearing up my car, kicking it, trying to break the window. So he looks at me, I look at him, and it's like, okay, the foot chase is on. So you're up in the woods of Connecticut. There's no street lights. There's no ambient light. So I'm calling it on the radio. Hey, foot pursuit. Guy vandalized my car. So he goes down the road, and clearly the kid's going to beat me. He's in sneakers and shorts, and I got 20 pounds of gear and boots. But the knucklehead actually ran into the woods and lost his advantage. So I grabbed onto him in there, but I just couldn't get his hands out to handcuff him. So I just pinned him on the ground. And every once in a while, he'd try and fight a little bit, and I'd pin him to the ground, waiting for my backup to get there. And then I dropped my flashlight, so I have no idea where that is. Um, and the kid's, he's drunk, so he's cursing at me, he's spitting and I just keeping him under control the best I can, and then using my portable to walk the first guy that came there to walk him into where I was, and then we hooked him up and took him back. Uh, so
Wow.
where I look at it like it's not a big deal. I played college hockey. I played in Canada. I've been in some fist fights before in hockey. Um, but like for the guys at the troop, I got a little bit of street credibility for that because I was willing and I handled myself. But at the same time, guys were like, "Do you understand what you did wrong?" I'm like, "I do now."
Mhm.
So it was a good learning experience, and everybody worked out. The kid didn't get hurt. I didn't get hurt.
Right.
The car had some dents in it. You know, home run for the most part.
Yeah. Now, when you're going through the training, like one of the things, like when I think about, to analogize again, to take the military experience to like what you do, is like in the Navy there are so many different specialties because there's so many different pieces of machinery, so many different situations, and there are so many people who just focus on those particular situations, whereas it seems like in law enforcement you've got one person who can deal with 1,000 different scenarios. I mean, it could be terrorism, it could be a drunken teenager, it could be domestic violence, it could be drug addiction,
Yeah.
it could be somebody having a heart attack. Like there are all these high stress situations
Yep.
that you've got to deal with and evaluate, like in a moment. I mean, is it even possible to have enough training to cover so many different
No.
scenarios?
Not even close. I mean, and I think like when they did the whole presidential thing when Obama came through and all that stuff happened with Michael Brown and they did all the investigations and the police training, the state police in Connecticut, we were actually above what we were supposed to have. Like they said, hey, these are the requirements, and we already had all that stuff plus. So we were always kind of in the front. Like we'd recognize like, hey, mental health training. Like we're only getting 3 hours. We need more of that. So we brought in somebody who had their own practice and gave an extra 8 hours, 10 hours of mental health training, not from law enforcement, but from somebody that actually had a degree in mental health. So we've always been proactive in that, which I think gives us a little more credibility, and it certainly gives us better ways to handle it. But I would say, and they talk to you. You get out there, and they're like, "Hey, look, you're on your own. So you're out of the academy. You spend back then it was 45 days with a field training officer or a couple different guys, one on each shift. And then on that 46th day, they're like, all right, kid, you're on your own. So the next time they call you on the radio, it could be whatever's coming. I had my first sexual assault case within 3 weeks of being on my own
Jesus.
because you don't always have detectives that are out there because, again, the staffing is just it's different. Our patrol area for where I was, 400 square miles for four guys, and I had 130, 135 square miles, and it was 35,000 people in that area, and that was mine by itself. Uh, so you're spread kind of thin, so you really rely on each other. And there's, depending on the day and how many people you have working, some days you have eight because it's an overlap. Well, the day of eight, you can be proactive and you can go out and actually shake the trees to see what you can find. The other days, you're not always going to be able to be proactive, just because you're going to alarms, you're going to domestics. A sex assault's going to take up a lot of time. Uh, you know, you have all this stuff that you start doing, and then you have that paperwork side of it. The senior guys were pretty good about helping you out, like especially in the beginning. They knew if you're going somewhere, they're going to send one of those guys with you. I'm like domestics were always 2-person call. But if you go to a burglary, right, somebody comes home if they realize their house was broken into. Um, I'm a week off FTO. I'm going to my first. We call them a 103 based on the statute. I'm going to my first one. They send the senior guy with me to make sure I don't screw anything up. I was also a little older because I was 29, so I wasn't, and I had worked for an insurance company. I had a legit job. Uh, so before I would go in, I would research the statutes again. I'm like, there's nothing active. So I would pull around the corner. I'd research the statutes to make sure I knew what I was talking about. I'd go in and then talk to the people, and I actually sounded like I knew what I was doing because I refreshed everything that I learned. Um, so there's that, and like you said, you could be, and I remember that the night I rolled around with that kid in the woods. After that, I processed him. I came out, and then we had to go look for a missing teenager. And now you talk to the parents. You just get done rolling around with somebody. I'm covered in mud, and now I'm going and talk to somebody that's missing their kid. So it's that roller coaster of emotions that you deal with. Um, and some guys do really well, but to your point, there's so many different avenues. There's so many different units you can apply for. Um, God, I wore a lot of different hats in my 20 years.
What were the hats that you wore?
So I did the patrol stuff for 3 years, and then I went to a resident trooper job. So a resident trooper in Connecticut some of the towns that don't have their own police department. They have a contract with the state to have one or more state troopers as their local PD. So every day I went to work, I went to a town called Ellington, and then from there, that was my area. It was like being a local cop, but in a state police uniform. From there, I ended up going to the academy to be an instructor. I did that for 3 years. Um, when I was in there, I ended up going to governor's security, and I worked for the governor's security for a year. I got promoted. From there, I took the test. And I got promoted. Couldn't stay in the same unit that you were in, so I got moved to Hartford, which was a highway troop versus a country troop that I worked in before. Uh, After that, I got moved to headquarters, and I ran our Amber Alert. The Amber Alerts. I ran our communication center. What else was there? The safe haven stuff. So, like, if somebody, drops a baby off at a hospital, I'm getting a phone call for the police side. Created our dispatch academy because we did that. So, since I had the education background uh, and worked at the academy, I teamed up with a bunch of people and we actually created a dispatcher academy. Then I went back to the academy and I was in the recruit coordinator. So there was a lieutenant and then me. So we did that stuff. And then from there, I went and did the accident reconstruction team for my last 4 years. And that's
Wow.
where I retired. Like I said, I had a really good career. I'm like, I have
Yeah.
no complaints. I got to wear a lot of different hats, got a lot of good experiences.
The accident reconstruction, is that like car crashes? Is that what you're talking
Yep.
about?
So that's our fatal reconstruction team. We call it CARS stood for um, Collision Analysis Reconstruction Squad. The acronym was CARS.
Hmm.
So there's one supervisor, which was me. We covered the whole state. Anybody that didn't have their own team, some local PDs had their own team, and we would, you were on call. I think in those 4 years, I had 5 weekends I didn't have to go to work,
Wow.
just because most of those crashes happen at night and on the weekends. And then during the day, you're doing all the follow up and you're doing all that. We average probably about 250 a year. So,
Wow. I mean, I kind of is that. It would seem to me that since driving is such a fundamental part of our lives, that could be a very harrowing thing to be doing because you just see how much. I mean, frankly, I'm sure stupidity, but also just how much chance can play into something happening to while you're driving. But how did it impact you, if at all?
uh, I think in that unit, it's definitely a unique unit because of the stuff you see. Car crashes are not very pleasant. They're violent. That's the easiest way to say it without getting into too much detail. Not everybody's really wired for that. You have to kind of be wired the right way because you're going to the crashes and dealing with that. And then all week long, you're going back through the photos and you're doing the investigation, you're talking with the families. So you're constantly immersed in that. Um, and not all of them are super violent, but then some of them are more violent than others. And I had some guys in the unit that didn't stay very long, or I would recognize that, hey, this one has kids involved, and a couple of the guys from the last one they're still struggling a little bit, so I'm going to keep them out of this one. I'll bring the other guys in and do that. Uh, we had one guy that needed a break. We were like, hey, absolutely, dude. Like, he wasn't sleeping at night. Like, yeah, you take the time. You're still in the unit if you want to be in the unit, but you can do a lot of paperwork, and we're just gonna let's get your head back in the right space before you decide that you want to come back in here. But
Yeah.
we're not going to kick you to the curb either, because we want to keep you in and do right by them.
Yeah.
So it certainly makes you hyper aware, of certain things. What are the stuff like something I tell people, like if you're driving on the highway at night, um, it, after as soon as it gets dark, don't drive in the left lane, center lane, or
Really?
right lane, because the wrong way driver who's drunk or elderly thinks that's the slow lane because they're coming the other way and they think that's the right lane and they're trying to be cautious because they're drunk or they're older.
Mm.
Meanwhile, you're coming in the left lane at a high speed, and that's your head-on collision. A lot of the head-on collisions are in that left lane.
Oh wow.
Um, and I had I've had three wrong way cars pass me in the middle of the night coming home from crashes because I was in middle lane and they would go past me in the left lane.
Wow.
So
Well, when I'm driving and I'll see somebody driving either really dangerously, like weaving in and out of traffic, or kind of like drifting in a way where it's like either they're on their phone or
yep.
driving drunk, my inclination is to either get past them as much as possible or just let them kind of go far ahead. What as a driver on the road, if you see a dangerous driver, what should one do?
For me, it's always based. Each situation is a little different. And my kid's 17, so he's. We've had those conversations. Um, and he grew up quick because in Connecticut we take our cars home. Um, and because I was on call all the time with the reconstruction team, taking him to his sports games, he would hear the stuff on the radio. He'd hear the phone conversation I'd have. He grew up pretty quick,
Hmm.
because they're not pleasant conversations over the phone. And then I'm doing it through Bluetooth. But the conversations we have with him is the same thing I tell everybody. One, again, you stay out of the left lane, but if you see that person in front of you, if you can safely get past them, you can get past them. But if they're kind of going back and forth and it's going to be a risk to get past them, I'd just back way off. There's a lot of times we call it driving high, and I've taught him the same thing. A lot of people only look at the car in front of them
Yeah.
instead of like five, six cars down. And you start to see something up there, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to back off a little because something's going to happen. Um, and there's been times where I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get off this exit. We'll grab a drink. I'll fill up, and that can go way past me.
Right.
It's just not worth it. It's like, I've told him, uh, my friend, like if you break down on the highway, just go nice and slow, keep your hazards on, and get off the highway. Like, I'll buy you a new tire. I'll buy you a new wheel. So many people get hit because they're broken down on the side of the road, or then
Really.
they get out of the car and now they're walking around the highway where you're going to get hit, and now you don't even have the car protection. So I just tell people, I'm like, hey, and again, I'm hyper sensitive to it because I've been to it.
Sure.
Where some people are like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, well, I've been to several of them, like
Yeah.
more than 20, which like I'll pay the extra $300 for a new wheel and a tire. I'm like, I think it's worth it. You go down to the end of the ramp, do it there versus staying up on the highway where people are going past you 80, 90 miles an hour.
Yeah. Wow. I never never thought. I don't. I live in Brooklyn, so I don't really
Right.
necessarily do that much driving. When I do, it's, it's a different setting. But no, that's really
Yeah.
helpful. What is like was the like you driving while texting, was that ever did that ever seem like got more under
I,
control, or is that always a
you
problem?
know, I'll be honest. The driving and texting bothers me more than having like somebody holding the phone up to their head. Driving itself is it's a divided attention skill. which is where all the tests come from. They're all divided attention. You're going to do one thing while you do another. And I've always said, and this was never a popular opinion, and I'm sure it won't be with a lot of people, if you can't talk on the phone and drive at the same time, you probably shouldn't have a license. You should be able to do those two things. It's no different than having a conversation with somebody in a car and driving,
Mm,
right? I just now have my hand here. This is a lot more dangerous because now your eyes are off the road.
yeah.
This is actually, in my opinion, safer because I can still watch the road.
Yeah.
It's like having a conversation with the person that you're in the car or that somebody's in the back seat. My hands up here. That's really the only difference. And is it safe? No, because you're not with two hands. How many people drive with two hands anyway? Not a lot all the time.
Mm,
But obviously it's the law, so
right.
it's the hamstring thing. But again, that's never a very popular opinion with some of my cohorts.
Hmm.
Like you can't tell people that. I'm like, it's true.
Yeah, no, I mean I always feel like what I've noticed a lot is like there are definitely people that when I see a car driving slower than the traffic, it's and I'll pass them, they're almost always on their phone texting
Yep,
something, which at least
on
they're
the
driving
phone.
slow. I mean, at least they're driving
Right.
slow, but
Yeah. On the phone, elderly, maybe somebody from out of state where they're not too sure where they are, but
yeah,
that's generally, you get them in that left lane and they're going the speed limit,
yeah,
and people are now doing the serpentine around them.
right. So would you say then that most of the car accidents that you saw were how many of them were avoidable versus like just shit happens?
Avoidable as far as
Like somebody did something having it involve somebody doing something stupid or irresponsible versus just you know
85% were avoidable,
uh,
if not 90. A lot of
uh,
it has to do with alcohol, drugs, speed is huge.
mm,
Um, people drive way too fast. They think their car is a sports car and it's not.
mm,
They go 80, 90 miles an hour and then they make that hard turn. You don't have a car like law enforcement. Our cars are built different. They're not as nice as some of the sports cars that are out there, but the suspension's different, the tires are different, the brakes are different. Uh, where people be like, "Well, you guys go 80." Well, yeah. You ever see the size of our brakes? They're giant. We have like speed rated tires. The suspension's different. We get training where you get somebody that's in a Mazda CX-5 going 90 miles an hour, and all of a sudden they make that hard lane change. That car is not designed to do that.
yeah,
And then they lose control at 100 miles an hour and go into the trees, and they're hitting
uh,
a tree at 80.
uh,
That's a bad. That's a bad day. But I'd say almost all of them are speed related, and then you throw in some type of impairment.
mhm.
Those are the two biggest. Speed and impairment, I think, were probably the most I saw. Um,
I'd be curious to see how much being sleepy impacts driving safety.
and that was always thing I struggled with because I was the only supervisor and I lived up on the Mass line. So if I was getting sent to a crash in Danbury or Greenwich, I got an hour and a half to get there, and
Yeah,
I'm probably doing 90, 95 miles an hour for an hour and a half. I had 7 guys that worked for me, and I could get them there. And most of the time, one of those guys would be there within an hour, but I'm still coming. And then you work all day. And I remember there was one weekend, the first weekend it happened. It's Thursday. I go to bed, normal time, 10 o'clock, whatever. I get up Friday. I'm at work. I work during the day, and then around 10:30, I'm getting ready to go to bed. And they call me for a crash out in Danbury, which for the people that know, that's out on the New York line. So that's a good hour and 20 minutes for me. Probably making an hour and 10 because I'm going lights and siren. I get the guys out there. But I'm not coming lights and siren home. And now there's no adrenaline. So I'm coming back at like 4 in the morning because we're done with the investigation. You try and stay awake because you are a little sleep deprived at that point. There's no impairment besides a shit ton of caffeine.
right.
Uh, Going back, and by the time I'm getting into the driveway, I'm just walking into the house. They called me again. They're like, "Hey, you got another one." Like, okay, where am I going this way? This time was Cromwell, so it was a little closer. It's like 40 minutes away. Straight down 91, which is the main highway that goes through one of the main highways in Connecticut. I go down there, so we're down there at 5. We're getting ready to wrap up around 9 o'clock, and they call me and they're like, "Hey, we got another one in Groton." So now I'm going out to the western part of the state. Uh, I get out there, so now it's Saturday afternoon, and I've really haven't had any sleep, any food. Um, and we're closing that one out probably, I want to say like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So now I'm coming home and I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I just don't feel good. And I'm like, wow, what the hell's going on? And then I started thinking, I'm like, shit. I'm like, holy crap, I've had like 900 milligrams of caffeine with no food. My heart's going to explode. Uh, but so you have those where sleep deprivation, absolutely. That's huge. The guy that took my spot when I retired, I told him like you're gonna want to go to everything you can't. You physically can't. You'll crash. I'm
Yeah.
like as much as you want to be the boss, you want to go to everything. There's gonna be ones that it's an easier one. You got to get some sleep too.
Yeah.
And he did crash because he was
Really.
trying to do everything. It wasn't a major crash. It's just one of those he kind of drifted to sleep and bumped somebody to a stop sign.
Mhm.
Um, and that's law enforcement sometimes. Like there's rules set in place that's not supposed to happen,
Mhm.
but then they have this magic term called needs of the department, and it's like, hey, you're gonna get blessed because it needs a department. You can work. Well, what if I don't want to work 37, like you know, 60 hours, like
Yeah.
so it's that like not everybody wants all that overtime, but then guys do work the overtime like that. Uh, because I was the only supervisor, I think I averaged close to 1,200 hours of overtime those 4 years.
Wow.
Each year, which is insane when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like I ended up getting like a watch that tracked my sleep. There was one week, it was a 4th of July weekend. And that week, I think I had a total of like 12 hours of sleep for the
Hmm.
whole week.
Oh
It's
my
just,
God.
you just, when you get done, you look back and you're like, how did I really like function? And it was difficult. Like I could fall asleep. Like I could have a Red Bull just to get home from like the day shift and then hit the couch and be out in like 10 seconds.
And I know that feeling, and but I'm not even in law enforcement. But
Right.
um,
What I did to my body, I have no idea.
yeah,
Like pumping it full of caffeine.
do,
Because I wasn't a coffee drinker, so I was doing energy drinks, which
yeah,
is awful. Awful.
yeah. Um, did you? I imagine in your 20 years, you had to pull out your gun sometimes.
Yeah. I didn't have to shoot anybody. I got shot at once. I had a couple people try and stab me.
Wow.
Um, it's a couple of those, the guy that was taking shots at us was a barricaded subject. Uh, Came in as somebody shooting fireworks. And it was a rural area, and we pull up, and I get there first, and one of the neighbors, he's like, it was gunshots. I'm like, came in as fireworks. And I knew
Hmm.
the area. I thought maybe somebody was like jack and deer.
Hmm.
For people that don't know what that is, that's like a backwoods thing where you go out in the nighttime and you just put a spotlight out in the field and you make the deer freeze because they're staring at the lights and then you shoot them.
Hmm.
Call it jack and deer.
Hmm.
It's illegal, but people do it in the woods. So I thought maybe somebody was jacking deer because there was a lot of deer over there. He's like, nope, it's coming from inside the house right there. I'm like, all right. So I waited for somebody else to get there. And then we snuck up on the house and we're listening. And we can hear somebody yelling. And then we made entry into the house and there was a stairway leading down. And at the top of the stairs was just this platform with the hallway going in both directions. And we could hear somebody yelling at somebody up there. And I looked at my buddy and I'm like, dude, this sucks. I'm like, there's no safe way to get up there. I'm like, I don't know if the stairs are going to squeak. He's clearly in there yelling at somebody. We haven't heard the other person. Uh, so we make contact. We yell up to him. And then he gets really agitated. And we hear him rack the shotgun round. And my buddy and I looked at him like, dude, that's coming through sheetrock. We're out. Like, out we go. Um, and in the meantime, as we were talking to him, there was another trooper that got there. Somebody pulled into the driveway, happened to be his girlfriend. And she was saying, no, he was arguing with me on the phone. We're like, so nobody else is in the house. They're like, no, the parents are gone. He was yelling at me on the phone. There's nobody in the house. We're like, all right, there's nobody up there. It's now a barricaded subject. We do not need to go try and kill this dude or have him take shots at us. We can get out, call the SWAT guys in, and try and talk him out. So we get out and then we take up positions. And in the top room, he threw a chair through the windshield, like the big plate window, and he's standing up there with a shotgun, and he must have saw one of us, and he took a shot at us, and it went cracking over our heads. And if it's close enough, you can hear it. It's a pretty loud snap. So we were kind of looking at each other like, dude, what are we doing? I'm like, but we didn't have long guns at the time, and you're 75 yards away with a handgun. It's not worth it. So we just took up our positions, waited. Long story short, they ended up talking him out. Got his sister on the phone from New Hampshire, and she talked him out. Um, all strung out on cocaine. He had, which is this. I love the criminal justice system. They put him on house arrest for 6 months. I'm like, well, sorry, he tried to shoot us.
Right. Wow.
But talking to that kid after, he came down to the department after, and he's like, "Hey, you were." I'm like, "Yeah, I was there." He's like, "Honestly," he's like, "I'm really sorry. I was strung out." He's like, "I honestly thought I was talking to like somebody that had horns on his head." I'm like, "Well, I don't have horns on my head, but you were talking to me." So
Wow.
it's just drugs are a nasty thing. Um, had another guy try to do the finger gun thing, like in his pocket,
Uh huh.
like he's trying to do the suicide by cop.
Uh huh.
It was around Christmas time. It happens, people get depressed around the holidays.
Uh huh.
And unfortunately, you get a lot of attempted or true suicides around the holidays. And this guy was having a bad day. He crashed the car and he went running through. It was in the winter. He went running through it, and I'm watching all the motion lights come on in the houses. So I'm like, well, that's him clearly.
Hmm.
So I drove around and I found him hiding behind a shed, and I peeked my head around and he's got his finger in his coat. I was pretty sure his finger, and I looked at him like, dude, stop it. He's like, you're supposed to kill me. I'm like, dude, I'm not killing you today. I'm like, take your finger out of your coat. He's like, it's not my finger, it's a gun. I'm like, it's not a gun. Stop. And I ended up throwing a couple snowballs at him.
Hmm.
Just and he finally broke down and started crying. And took him to the hospital, got him some help. It's you have those incidents, but again, that's for everything we do in the academy. We do it for a reason. So when you get to those situations, you don't lose your mind, you don't panic, and you don't end up making the wrong decision. At least you hope.
Yeah.
Try and do the right thing.
I mean, and I'm sure there are times when you do make the wrong decision. I mean, like
Oh
that guy
yeah.
could have had a gun.
Um,
You have to go by. You can't. You're making decisions in the moment based on a scarce amount of facts.
yep. Yeah, and that's always where when I first got out, law enforcement, we were heroes. It was 9/11. You have all the first responders are heroes, and then I go through the whole gamut of the George Floyd, the Michael Brown thing, and I saw that full circle of where now we're villains to some people. I don't know, like it's. I never had that problem with people. I could always talk to them. I never took it personal. Somebody's getting mad at me and they're yelling at me. They're calling my family names. They don't know who my family is. I'm like, and I tried to stress that. That was one of the things I liked as being an instructor. I got to put my thumbprint on the new guys coming out and explain to them it's never personal. Even if somebody tries to make it personal, they don't know who you are. They're mad at patch on the shoulder. They're mad at this thing that represents Connecticut State Police, and it just happens to be me. And they hell, they called my mother all kinds of names, and I remember the kid doing it, and I was like, dude, I don't even know who my mother is. I was adopted. And he looked at me. He's like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "No, man, I was adopted. Not adopted, but he didn't know that." And it completely diffused the situation, and it just went away.
Hmm.
Versus letting them get under your skin and making something personal, and then no making decisions when you're upset
Right.
generally have really bad consequences.
Well, did the? I mean, I guess seeing the I guess referring to like the George Floyd and all those situations. Um, I would imagine that when those things happen, they also it's not just about people seeing it, but also it then impacts how they interact with police going forward, right? I mean, doesn't it kind of like puts fuel on the fire? So I'm sure it's already a difficult position for you when you're dealing with guys who are hopped up on cocaine or just the heightened emotional situations that you're in, and now you've gotten and I guess I mean I know this is a far more complicated topic than than anybody has been able to kind of really address. But like the big do I guess I'm trying to think of like does it how does it feel when, like, I mean, for you and like for any other cops, like when you've been doing your job, you were there for 9/11, and then all of a sudden there are police reports of, there are news reports about some bad incidences, and I always kind of like tried to frame it in terms of like there in any job there's going to be bad apples. In every job there's going to be people who are just not very good or make stupid mistakes, and the police force, as much as they're given a lot trusted with a lot of responsibility, is going to have those same kind of problems. So I guess like how much of like how does it feel when you're a police officer who's not doing those things, but you're getting like tarred and feathered with all the bad vibes and everything else that comes from what the mass media is like talking about? And they might be, and there are things that need to be talked about, but I think things
Yep.
sometimes become all consuming to where people start, can get overly emotionally engaged about something to where,
Yeah,
like, yes,
they can.
there's police officers who did despicable things, but now they see every police officer as that bad apple, whereas I don't believe that that's the case. But I honestly don't have enough exposure to law enforcement to know, you
So
know
I always looked at it as it's case by case, right? Like I never truly jumped on any of the bandwagons on either side, because most of the time you don't know the whole story until the whole story comes out. So a lot of times people would ask my opinion, and I'd be like, I don't have an opinion yet. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, because I don't know everything yet. We're getting what they want us to know. I'm like, I may end up seeing the whole video of something, which we did for a lot of the stuff, just because of the training environment, but everything had to take its course first. So a lot of times I was very cautious about taking one side or the other. And I would have those conversations with people if they're willing to have. As far as people coming after me, like with a tar and feather, again, I was always pretty grounded as it really isn't Scott Leonard they're coming after. They're coming at this thing on the patch, what I represent. And if they truly knew who I was, they wouldn't be coming after me like that. And I tried to make them, what I always call from, a training point, a teachable moment. Like I remember coming home from the academy. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm going home, and I see this car coming up in my mirror, like going Mach 2. I'm going 75, and this guy he smoked me something. So I turn my lights on, I go pull him over. As I pull him over, this woman jumps out of the passenger car, white woman, coming back, raising her hands, yelling, and I'm like, oh Jesus, what do I have? So we don't let people run at us, right? So I jump out of the car, we're on the side of the highway, I'm telling her to stop, sit on the guardrail. Meanwhile, driver gets out, black dude, he's standing there with his camera. He's like, I know what you're going to do. And this is shortly after the Michael Brown incident. So he's videoing, yelling at me. And I'm like, dude, get back in your car. He's like, I'm like, you videoing me. Just get back in your car. Well, he didn't realize he's standing in the lane of travel. Like, because he's so cranked up, he's standing in the lane of travel. So I finally get him to sit in the car. I told him, like, stick your hand out and video me if you want. I don't care. I'm like, I got a camera on. I'm like, I'm videoing too. Uh, so I start talking to her. She's clearly highly intoxicated. And then I get her, I call the troop and be like, hey, I need somebody else because this is what I got going on. And of course, they're like, we don't have anybody. We're busy. We'll get you somebody as soon as we can. Okay, I'll deal with it on my own. So I get her calmed down, and then I go up and talk to him. And, and he's doing the cell phone thing before it was really popular. And I'm like, dude, I just want to be able to see your face. You can put it down and record me. I'm cool with that. He's like, you don't care? I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, tell me what's going on. He's like, you pulled me over. I'm like, dude, your windows are so tinted. I have no idea who's in this car. I'm like, if you think I have X-ray vision and I pulled you over because you're black, like you're much better than I am because I couldn't see you. One, you're going way too fast. It's like, well, you're pulling me over because I'm dating a white girl. Dude, I didn't know you guys were dating. I knew it when she told me. I'm like, I don't know who you are or your life. So we started having a real conversation about what's going on. Now he's telling me, he's like, he was trying to get her home. She was freaking out because her family doesn't like him because there's a race thing going on. She tried to jump out of the car. And he's like, am I in trouble? I'm like, dude, you're not in trouble. I'm like, you got more issues going on with your girlfriend right now. Let's get her some help. I'm like, and then we'll get her some help. If she needs to go to the hospital, we'll get her to the hospital. And I'm not even going to give you a ticket. He's like, seriously? I'm like, dude, you got so many other issues going on in your life right now.
Mm.
I'm like, but at the end of it, it was a good conversation. We were laughing. He's like, dude, he's like, this is not what I expected. I'm like, it's because you watch too much TV. I'm like, we're not like that. I'm like, you're seeing a microcosm of what people are. I'm like, I, I'm like, now I want you to go back and I want you to look at your video and see how many cars almost hit you. And he's like, holy shit. I'm like, dude, 3 cars almost hit you. He's like, I didn't know. I'm like, that's why I was telling you to get back in the car. So you have things like that. So I looked at it. If people are willing to talk, I'll talk to them. Like, like they may not always like the answers, and I may not like their answers, but we can still have a really good conversation, and maybe get people a little closer than they thought of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is if as long as you didn't take it personal. I've always had a camera in my car. I was one of the first guys with a camera, the old VHS in the trunk.
Oh wow.
Uh, so I was one of the guinea pigs when they first came out. There's three of us. They're like, hey, you're going to get a computer and a camera. And I was like, okay. I loved having a camera. Like a lot of guys are like, dude, I'm like, it's got me out of so much trouble. People call up and complain. He swore at me, and you'd have to go in and talk to the sergeant. And I'd be like, I didn't swear at him. It was just a traffic stop. Well, they're saying
Hmm.
you swore. I'm like, I didn't. They're like, well, they're saying you did. I'm like, well, you want me to bring the camera in? They're like, what do you mean? They're like, oh, you got a guy with a camera. I'm like, yeah, I got a camera. And you take the VHS out, you rewind it, you play it. And he's like, you didn't swear. I'm like, that's what I've been telling you. So then they call the people up and be like, hey, in case you didn't know, Trooper Leonard had a camera in his car and recorded everything. Would you like to change your story? And they hang up. So for me, that camera was a lifesaver because it got me out of a lot of stuff that people tried to do.
Hmm.
Um, where, you know, body cam, bring it on, man. I'm like, I'll be all for it. I'm not doing anything wrong.
Right.
Never have, not worried about it. I've been investigated. I've been cleared of everything, because I know I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
That's the easy part. Are you put in positions where you would like it to go a different way and you don't want to put hands on people? Sometimes that's what happens. And
Right.
unfortunately, sometimes people get injured, to include us.
Yeah.
It's people that think like it's fun to roll around on the highway with somebody. It's not. I'm like, you're both going down onto the pavement. That shit hurts.
Right. Yeah. And you don't know what's going to happen after that. I mean, like
Right.
what
One of the
once.
last ones, I'm rolling around in the middle of 91 with a woman because she's trying to jump into lane traffic, kill herself. Um, and that's rolling between our two cars, and it's rush hour. People are driving past
Oh
us, and
my
I'm like,
god.
this is the way I'm going to die. I'm going to get run over because this woman was trying to jump into traffic.
Wow.
So there's a lot of those things, but in the long run, like I said, great career, had a lot of good experiences, had some nasty ones too, but far outweigh the good. Like, good conversations. Even during that time, um, I had more good conversations by the end of the conversations. They were generally much better than people thought they were going to go.
Mhm.
Um, but I was also willing to take the time and talk to people.
Right. And
You know,
is that part of the training? Do you feel like that's instilled as part of the training for troopers?
I think part of it is the way I was brought up. Give my
Mm.
parents a lot of credit. Small town living, everybody knows everybody, everybody's friends. You naturally talk. People today are too much on their cell phone. They don't know how to communicate. They text everything. Being willing to have that and just truly, really wanting to help. The academy tries to give you some, and there's a process. There's psychological stuff that they're trying to weed some of that stuff out in that process. But in that development, you're going to get some, but you don't get it all. And this is kind of where I think my education background also helped because I had the psych classes. Granted, they were entry level. By no means am I a counselor or a social worker. I'm not remotely close, but I had enough to at least be able to talk to people and recognize that maybe this one's a little off. Maybe I should talk to him about medication because something's just not flowing right. And maybe there's a little something there that I need to talk. And
Hmm.
a lot of times that stuff would pan out too. And in the insurance company doing the investigation stuff, I got great training there. Like I had handwriting analysis. Like you got some really good training for investigator for an insurance company.
Really? Huh? So you're charting a career path, yeah, for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, it was good. Like I said, that was and taking that stuff, and I did that for 3 years, and then bringing that into the law enforcement world. So I was really getting a lot of stuff stacked on each other to kind of feed off it,
Mm-hmm.
which I think really helped.
Yeah. The the one thing I've noticed like is I don't feel like, at least like, in where I live, that kids don't necessarily have law enforcement on their like career path, as far as like, people usually like, I want to be a scientist, I want to be, a lawyer, doctor. I mean, I think maybe where there are families where people are in law enforcement, there might be
Yep.
more of more of an inspiration to do that. But if it's not part of the community, which, I mean, like where I live, it's just there aren't a lot of police officers that feed into
Yep.
the schools. It's not. Is that something that you think would, like, could be remedied or should be remedied, that would, to have a
There's a
more.
there's a couple things I think are at issue. So a great example is when I took our written test for the state police. There's 12,000 of us that took the test. 183 of us got in out of the
Wow.
12,000. Now, some people probably failed. I don't know where they've lost. You lose a lot of people in the polygraph because we get polygraph to make sure that we're not, lying about stuff. You got your psych background, you got your physical. And then you got your background investigation, where they're literally going to places I used to live, 10 years ago and knocking on doors, like, hey, do you remember this guy? They're like, oh yeah, he like, remember him sitting in a hammock with his dog and reading? I'm
Mm,
like, that was me. Like, not a party guy. I'm like, I'm
right.
not gonna go, stir the pot. I'm going to hang outside with the dog. And back then, I had one of those little kiddie pools because I had no money. So it was
Mm,
that plastic kiddie pool. I would sit in it. The dog would sit in it,
mm-hmm.
and I'd read a book and have a beer. Like, that was my life at 29 years old. Uh, but now you can't get 1,000 people to apply to the state police. So in a matter of 23 years, you went from 12,000 people applying to barely 1,000. And part of that is the money. They get paid very well, but they're starting to take away pensions. They're starting to take away benefits. Um, I was working for State Farm Insurance at 29 years old, making almost $100,000 back in 2001. That was really good money for a 29-year-old kid back then. If they had the stuff they had now, as much as I want to do it, I don't know if I would have jumped ship,
Mm,
because I went to the state police, and back then I went from making like 95 to 38. I took almost a $60,000 pay cut because I wanted to do the job.
mm,
And I also knew at 20 years, I could potentially retire with a pension and medical, where a lot of departments have gone away from that. So where's the incentive for these people that were like me, that like, I'm making really good money and I really want to do that, but I got to think about my future as far as like retirement and things like that. And that's not, I'm going to stay here and go on a fast track and make 400,000 and build up my 401 and be able to retire at 55. Uh, you're still going to have people that really, really want it. And like you said, you have those legacy, we call them legacy candidates.
mm.
It's the family path. People always say, would you want your son to do it? I'm like, no. I'm like, not right now. I'm like, it's just the world's too volatile for that. Like
Really.
I told him, like, if you really want to do something and you're passionate about helping people, uh, there's other career paths.
Mm,
Like right now he's looking at the Air Force.
okay.
You know, I mean, out of the military branches, I'm like, it's probably one of the least likely to go on the front line. So I'm okay with that. I'm like, I don't want you to go in the Marines, dude, because you're probably going to be on the front line.
Mm,
Army too.
mm,
Navy maybe not so much. And he's a smart kid. He's
mm,
smarter than his old man. He wants to do the whole engineering thing. So,
mm.
but yeah, it's. I think part of it is everybody looks at it different. People are growing up different, at least around here. You don't have people don't look at that career as like, hey, that's a respectable career because of the media coverage. Um, all the most of the media attention is the negative stuff, and when you really look at the numbers, it's a very minuscule number. It's that's the stuff that makes news.
Right.
And if people are willing to have the conversations, like, you can kind of talk away some of that. You still need um, the checks and balances to make
Hmm.
sure that stuff doesn't happen, which I'm all for, and most of us are. But I don't know how they fix that. That's one of the pieces is the pension thing. Like you got to start, and pensions are expensive for towns to keep, and I get it. Um, they don't have to be as lucrative as they were back in the 90s, but you still have to be able to like say, hey, look, this is what you're going to get. Because I couldn't imagine working a patrol job until I was like 55, 60. Like
Hmm.
my body's beaten out from wearing all that shit.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure. It's and all the departments are the same. The local departments are the same. Fire departments are the same. Your public service jobs that a lot of people used to flock to. Everybody's really struggling to get people and good quality people.
If there's, I feel like there. I don't know if the teaching has a problem. That you heard a lot about teachers kind of getting out during the pandemic, but there is something about being a public servant
Mm.
that I think in more general terms of I think we've lost sight of or lost respect for or lost I don't know what it is, but it's a bigger issue. Even like some of the stuff like nurses and there are these kind of like infrastructural like types like services are that every community needs that get taken for granted
Oh yeah,
and and I think that that's a kind of it's a bigger issue. So to me, I think that like the discussion about law enforcement is, I mean, there might be problems, but the discussion should really be much broader than just talking about some misdeeds, but just talking about like how do we attract the best people and how do we attract enough people to be able to choose good people.
right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you start looking at teachers. I mean, I went to school for teaching, and
Yeah,
I went a different path. Part of it because I really wanted to do law enforcement, but the other part was I wasn't making any money.
yeah.
I was working 60 hours. I was working at two Catholic schools and a YMCA every night until 11, and then I'd get up, and it was North Jersey, so I'm over at Ridgefield and Teaneck, early in the morning, right on the other side of New York City, and then driving out to Montclair for my night shift, and
Mm,
then coming back to Paramus to go back to Teaneck. Like it was like that's that's a rough way to live, especially
yeah,
the cost of living down there was expensive.
yeah.
So I ended up leaving that career path to try and actually pay my bills.
Mm,
And that is a huge thing. Like, is you have some really good teachers, as you know, um, it that put a lot of time and effort into their kids.
mm,
And it's the same thing right now with like teachers, right? You hear about all the negative stuff,
yeah,
like all the stuff that's going to make the media. Like, well, what about the teachers that are really good and care about their kids? Let's hear about them.
yeah,
Um, the negative stuff will take care of itself. That's always going to show up. Like, let's find some more positive stuff.
yeah.
Um, we'll still deal with the negative stuff. We'll still deal with the people that are screwing up. But in the grand scheme of things, that's a small number of people. Um,
I, I wonder if it's kind of a legacy of like the 60s mentality where like every institution was questioned and if we celebrate the good parts of the institutions, whether it's law enforcement or whatever, then we're kind of like whitewashing it or overlooking the flaws, because
yeah,
I don't know what it is, but that's the only thing I can think of is, whether it's churches or whatever. And I mean, I'm not, and I don't go to church. I'm, politically, I'm more to the left, but when you think about all these different things we're talking about, the common factor seems to be that they're part of institutions and
yep,
I feel like that was the legacy of the 60s and maybe for good reason. There was too many institutions that were lying or you know hiding things, so therefore we can't trust anything that they say. Therefore, to do say anything good is just propaganda, but to
yep.
see something bad, that's the truth. And maybe we need to kind of like swing the pendulum a little bit back to be trying to get the facts about the institutions to understand the good and the
Yeah,
bad.
I think that's a great point, right? Like you see that a lot where if somebody says something, yeah, but you're ignoring that. Well, we're not ignoring it. We're just not going to completely focus on it. We're still addressing. Like we have checks and balances in place, or we maybe need better checks and balances, and we can put those in place. But we can still take the people that are good in the industry whatever it may be, and let's say, hey, look, this is somebody we want to model. We're going to deal with this, and this is how we're going to deal with it, and we're going to have that transparency. We're going to have the checks and balances, and we can do all that stuff, but we don't want to lose sight of who the good people are too. And I think sometimes that's kind of what happens, right? Like everybody focuses because it's like blood in the water. It's easy. Well, it's
Yeah.
easy. It's easy, to throw stones from the glass house. Like,
Right.
careful. Um, and I don't know. Like again, I've always been open to both conversations. Like I mentioned, something I was going on a podcast. They're like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "What do I have to hide, man?" I'm like, it'll be good to have conversations. This is good stuff to talk about, even stuff that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, you gotta have the conversations, or it never gets better.
Yeah. Yeah, I've tried to. I have a few contacts with like NYPD, but I've never found anybody who was either allowed to or comfortable coming on, even as a retired NYPD. And to me, I've always been like, look, I don't. This isn't about gotcha. I think we
Yeah.
just need to get back to trying to understand the
Yep.
experiences, and that's
Uh,
it. Like it's not nothing
Absolutely.
more. Um,
Yeah, and I think like if I was still working, there's no way I'd be able to come on. The department would be like, yeah, no.
yeah,
We were very strict in our social media. Like if you were on Facebook or anything and you presented yourself as a trooper, you're then held to the standards, and you can't be disparaging. You can't be like we were very very strict.
yeah,
But if you didn't hold yourself up, like if I had a picture of me in uniform, that's it. I'm now held to the standard of the Connecticut State Police, and I can't embarrass the department.
right,
Um, and embarrassment is the term they use. Doesn't mean I can't, be a whistleblower. It just means I can't like MF them in open social media.
yeah, yeah.
It's a paramilitary structure. It's you
No,
accept that going in.
yeah,
And then
understood.
when you retire, a lot of times the guys that retire become the voice for the guys on the road
Right,
because they don't really have the voice. Uh, and I don't really do that because it's not my thing.
right.
Um, I'd rather do stuff like this where you have a
Yeah,
conversation with somebody, which is it's fun.
yeah, and I guess this is for me. I started this because I just was so for lots of reasons, but among them is just seeing the. I think the news media is really just driven by clickbait and like getting
Oh
likes
yeah,
and clicks, and I was like, I understand you got to make money, that's fine, but I want to have like real conversations and you know give everybody a chance to kind of hear more, not just like nuance, but just kind of hear something that's not hyped up. I mean, is this conversation really, is this going to get a million likes? No, but this is real people. I hope
right.
you felt that way. I feel like it, and real
And I
experiences.
think for some people they may have that misconception of what the academy was all about or how that was always a big thing. Like the state police takes a lot of heat for the way we train,
Mm,
because they don't understand why we train that way, and there's a lot of yelling, there's a lot of screaming in the beginning. But again, it's not done to personally attack the kids, and break them down into like and then develop into robots. It's so they can function high stress. And at
yeah,
some point, you like I never realized the amount of stress I was under. And a couple of my buddies retired, and they're like, "Dude, when you retire, you're gonna feel so much better." I'm like, "But I'm not stressed." And they're like, "You just don't know it." And then I had a watch that had like the heart rate monitor, and I'm going to one of the calls, just another fatal, going down to Bridgeport, and I'm talking on the phone. It's the Bluetooth. I'm going lights and siren down 91, probably about 105, 110, and I'm cranking down 91, and I'm having a conversation just like this on the phone with somebody, and I look down at my watch, and my heart rate's at like 135. I was like, "Oh, that's what
Jesus.
they mean." I'm like,
Wow.
I'm like, I'm having a normal conversation, but my heart rate's at 135 driving because my adrenaline dump is like, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah,
I'm like, I've just learned to function at that level of my heart rate can be up there, but we can still have this conversation.
yeah.
Um, that's when it clicked for me. I'm like, that's what they're talking about. I'm like,
Wow.
and they're right. Like once I retired, it took about 6 months to like, I'm like, okay, this is what they're talking about. I'm like, this is nice. Like, I like this.
Well, I'm not a Connecticut resident, but I'll thank you for your services in the law enforcement world.
Yeah, like I
The
said,
all they
I,
went there.
I was very fortunate. I had a great career.
Yeah, it was great. Um,
So,
I can I ask like what we're getting definitely gone past the hour mark here, but can I ask I guess to wrap up like what gives you hope at the end of the day?
what gives me hope? Um, that's a tough one to like put my finger on it because there's a lot of things that give me hope actually. Um, and it's kind of strange because of all the stuff I saw in those especially the last 4 years because I was around death 24/7. And sometimes people have a hard time keeping their head above water and doing that. And for me, it was part of it was seeing how people can function even in that. Like you're giving them the worst news possible, and people pull it together, right? And the natural resiliency of the human person, like the soul, like that gives you hope. And then you see it with the kids, like your kid does something good, doing something like this where we're just having a conversation we've never met, and we could talk for an hour and 15 minutes, and it goes by like that. That kind of stuff gives me hope because this is what's supposed to happen, right? You're supposed to be able to have these conversations, and this is really lacking sometimes. And when you can have that, and you see that recovery ability in the human soul, when people have these nasty, nasty things, but they still come out on top. May not feel like it. They're in the trench, or you see the kids that like I did a lot of coaching. You see the kids grow into adults that look like they're going to be pretty good adults. Like that kind of stuff gives me hope for the most part.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for making so much time for being open to this conversation at all. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And best of luck in the ventures. And I'll be a subscriber and watching the other podcast.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And
All right.
thank you to all the viewers and listeners out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Take care, Scott.
Thanks.